Los Huesos had become the kind of New Mexico town where a man could hear a woman beg for help and suddenly become very interested in his whiskey. That was what people remembered after the warrants burned, after the graves were counted, after the dust finally settled over Main Street again. It was May of 1884, and by sundown, the whole town would understand one thing. Cassian Voss had not built his empire with a pistol. He had built it with paper. Paper signed under fear. Paper stamped by bought men. Paper folded neatly over ruined families. Until theft started looking respectable. That afternoon, inside the Blue Lantern Saloon, Clara Whitcomb's hand was being forced toward one of those papers, while 30 grown men pretended not to see. She was 24, the only daughter of Elias Whitcomb, a dry country rancher, who had been found dead 9 days earlier, near North Fork Wash. That was the official version. The unofficial version lived in every lowered eye inside that saloon. Cassian Voss stood beside the poker table in a dark waistcoat that had no dust on it. He owned the freight yard, the feed store, 3 wells south of town, and enough frightened men to make the county clerk write whatever he wanted. Lyle Crane leaned against the bar with a shotgun across his arms and a badge pinned crooked on his vest. 2 of Voss's riders held Clara by the wrists. A third man pressed an ink pen between her fingers. All she had to do was sign. That was what Voss kept saying in his soft, educated voice. Sign the lien. Admit her father owed $612. Turn over the Whitcomb water claim until the debt could be settled. Everyone inside the room understood the lie. Elias Whitcomb had never borrowed from Cassian Voss, and the land Voss wanted was not the scrub ranch house, or the 2 broken corrals, or the poor cattle left after the drought. It was the spring beneath Cottonwood Ridge. The railroad survey crews had been seen near that ridge twice in April. Men with clean boots and brass instruments had crossed Voss's freight yard before daylight. After that, 3 small ranchers sold for almost nothing. 1 widow disappeared east. 1 old herder took a bullet in what Deputy Crane called a boundary mistake. Then Elias Whitcomb died. Now his daughter knelt in sawdust while the whole town watched the next theft become law. Your father was a proud man, Voss told her. Proud men make foolish debts. My father never signed your note, Clara said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. Deputy Crane tilted the shotgun slightly toward her. Pen don't move by itself, Miss Whitcomb. The piano player stopped in the middle of a bar. Somewhere outside, a horse struck its hoof against the hitch rail, and then the saloon door opened. Not hard, not dramatic, just a tired hinge, a blade of white afternoon light, and a man in a trail coat standing in the doorway, with dust caked up to both knees. He looked close to 50, maybe younger before the road got hold of him. His beard was gray at the jaw. His hat brim had been reshaped by weather instead of fashion. Colt hung low on his right hip, plain, scratched, and carried by a man who had not bought it for show. Nobody knew him. But silence moved through the room before he did. The stranger looked at Clara's wrists, then the pen, then the paper, then Deputy Crane's shotgun. Last of all, he looked at Cassian Voss. Take your hands off her. Nobody laughed. One of Voss's riders grinned anyway, because foolish men sometimes mistake quiet for weakness. You deaf, old man? The stranger stepped farther inside. His hand did not touch the Colt. That mattered. Men who draw too soon often do so because they are afraid the room will notice they have nothing else. This man waited, because he understood the girl on the floor would be the first thing shot if panic got loose too quickly. "I said," the stranger repeated, "take your hands off her." The rider nearest the table shoved Clara's shoulder and reached for his pistol with the other hand. He never cleared leather. The stranger moved sideways, drove the heel of his palm into the man's jaw, and sent him crashing through a chair. The second rider swung with a bottle. The stranger caught his wrist, twisted once, and the bottle shattered on the floor without touching him. Deputy Crane lifted the shotgun. The Colt came out then. One shot cracked through the room, not at Crane's chest, not at his face, at the shotgun itself. The blast tore splinters from the stock and knocked the barrel sideways. Crane cursed as the weapon clattered against the bar rail. Real silence followed, not the polite kind, the kind men make when death has just entered the room and chosen not to sit down yet. The stranger holstered the Colt slowly. Then he reached down and offered Clara his hand. She stared at him a moment before taking it. No one had offered her anything gentle in 9 days. Cassian Voss's face had lost its careful smile. "Who are you?" he asked. The stranger helped Clara to her feet and stood between her and the room. "No one you can buy." Clara heard the words, but it was something else that froze her. As he shifted his shoulder in front of her, the stranger murmured under his breath, almost too low for anyone else, "Never trust clean boots in a dusty town." Her father used to say that. Not often, only when men arrived at the ranch, pretending to be honest. Clara looked at the stranger differently then, not with trust, with suspicion, because a man who knew her father's private sayings might have come to help, or he might have come carrying the other half of the lie. Voss folded the unsigned paper and slid it into his coat. "You have made a public mistake," he said. The stranger glanced around the saloon, the card players, the bartender, the piano man, the decent men who had found safe places to look. "Public's the only kind this town understands." Deputy Crane recovered his shotgun with one hand. The broken stock made it awkward, but not harmless. "Back room," Voss said. The stranger did not move. Voss's voice stayed mild. "Miss Whitcomb can leave this room upright, or she can be dragged out of it. Your choice is whether she bleeds on the way." That was the sort of sentence that ruled Los Huesos. Not loud, not angry, just practical enough to make cowards feel reasonable. The stranger looked at Clara. "You hurt bad?" "No." It was only half true, but pride sometimes speaks before pain has gathered its words. The stranger nodded once. "Walk slow." Voss led them past the bar and down a narrow hallway into a storage room that smelled of warm whiskey, mouse droppings, and stale flour. Deputy Crane stood near the door with the damaged shotgun. 2 riders waited behind him with pistols drawn. Voss placed the lean paper on a crate and smoothed it flat. $612, he said. 1 note, 1 witness mark. Placed the lean paper on a crate and smoothed it flat. $612, he said. 1 note, 1 witness mark. 1 debt passed down by law. The stranger leaned against the wall. Where did Elias die? The question landed too quickly. Voss blinked only once. North Fork Wash. Who found him? Deputy Crane. The stranger looked at Crane. Body wet? Crane frowned. What? North Fork still had water in April. Man dies there, he comes home with mud in his cuffs, silt in his hair, river stink in his clothes. Elias come home that way? Nobody answered. Voss smiled thinly. You ask questions for a drifter. I listen for answers from liars. Crane stepped forward, but the stranger's eyes had already dropped, just for a second, to Crane's boots. A pale gray crust clung around the left heel. Not river mud, not North Fork mud. Alkali dust from the flats east of Cottonwood Ridge. Anybody who had ridden dry country long enough knew the difference. Clara saw the stranger notice it. Then she saw Crane notice that he had noticed. That was when fear shifted in the room. Until then, Cassian Voss had been dealing with a gun hand. Now he was dealing with a man who knew how lies stuck to leather. The stranger spoke softly. Funny thing, as he found a rancher at North Fork, but his boots carry cottonwood alkali. Crane looked down before he could stop himself. A small mistake, a deadly one. Voss's expression hardened. That proves nothing. No, but it points. Clara's throat tightened. My father was found at Cottonwood? The stranger kept his eyes on Crane. Looks more honest than North Fork. Crane raised the shotgun with both hands. Enough. The stranger had been waiting for the word. He grabbed the barrel, shoved it upward, and the blast tore a black hole into the ceiling boards. Flour dust spilled from a torn sack. Clara ducked as a rider fired blind and shattered a whiskey jug against the wall. The stranger slammed his shoulder into Crane, drove him into the crate stack, and snatched Clara's wrist. Move. They crashed through the back door into the alley. A bullet struck the frame behind Clara's head. The stranger pulled her behind a water trough, fired once to push a man back, and shoved her toward the laundry yard beyond the saloon. They ran through sheets hanging on lines, past barking dogs, past a Chinese cook who pulled his cleaver up and said nothing. By the time Voss's men reached the alley mouth, the stranger and Clara had cut behind the livery stable and disappeared into a maze of sheds near the edge of town. They stopped inside an abandoned tack room. Clara bent over, breathing hard, sawdust still stuck to the side of her dress. The stranger listened at the cracked wall until the shouts moved away. Then Clara pulled a folded scrap from inside her sleeve. My father sent this with a boy the morning before he died. I thought it was grief making me read meaning into it. She handed it to him. The paper was creased with sweat. Only one line had been written in Elias Whitcomb's hard pencil hand. If the bell rope breaks, lift the stone that never rings. The stranger read it twice. For the first time since he had entered the saloon, the calm left his face. What bell? He asked. Our ranch has an old mission bell by the South Corral. It hasn't rung since I was a child. Then Voss hasn't found what he wants yet. Clara studied him. Father. The stranger folded the note and handed it back. I owed him. That is not an answer. No, he said. It is what's left of one. They waited until the sun dropped low, then stole 2 horses from a half-collapsed shed behind the livery. Clara insisted on leaving money under a saddle blanket. The stranger almost argued, then did not. Some people hold on to honesty even when the world has stopped rewarding it. They rode east out of Los Huesos without taking the wagon road. The stranger gave his name only after the town fell behind them. Nathan Rowe. Clara repeated it once, as if testing whether her father had ever spoken it near the fire. He had. Years earlier, Elias Whitcomb had mentioned a scout named Rowe, who guided freight wagons through Apache Pass, found water where other men found bones, and vanished after 3 teamsters died in a canyon ambush. You left men behind, Clara said. Nathan did not answer at first. The desert was turning violet ahead of them. Jackrabbits broke through greasewood. Far off, the ridgeline sat black against the remaining light. Finally, he said, I left one man behind. My father? No, your father came back for me. That was all he gave her, and somehow that made the silence heavier. They reached the Whitcomb place after dark. The ranch looked smaller under moonlight. The porch sagged, ooked smaller under moonlight. The porch sagged. One wall of the barn leaned from years of wind. The corrals were half empty, and the cattle that remained stood thin and watchful in the dust. The front door was open. Nathan saw it before Clara did. He raised one hand. She stopped. The house had been torn apart, drawers on the floor, bedding sliced open, the Bible shaken from its shelf. Elias Whitcomb's shirts trampled into dust. Clara stepped inside and froze beside the kitchen table. Her father had kept the table clean, even during drought. Now boot prints crossed it. That was the moment grief found her properly. Not in the saloon, not under the gun, in the small ruin of an ordinary room her father had touched every morning. Nathan did not comfort her with speeches. He moved through the house, reading damage as if damage had a language. Voss's men were here before sundown. How do you know? They were still careful near the pantry. Men search different when they think they have time. Outside, near the south corral, the old mission bell hung from a cottonwood frame blackened by weather. Its rope had rotted away years ago. Beneath it lay several flat stones in a rough circle. One stone was lighter than the others, the stone that never rang. Nathan pried it up with a fence iron. Underneath sat a rusted coffee tin wrapped in oilcloth. Clara opened it with shaking hands. Inside were three things: a water deed dated 1867, a small ledger with Elias Whitcomb's writing, and a brass chain link from a surveyor's measuring line. Clara touched the deed first. Nathan took the ledger. The first pages were ordinary ranch accounts: feed, nails, salt blocks, wages for a Mexican vaquero named Aurelio Sand. Then the numbers changed: Voss Freight, Crane, Judge Tabor, Survey Advance, Cottonwood Spring Option, 12 ranch parcels listed by initials instead of names. Beside one entry, Elias had written, Paid L.C. 3 days before the killing, Lyle Crane. Clara closed her eyes. And another page. There, in a tighter hand, Elias had written the line that made even the night seem to hold its breath. If I am found at North Fork, that is where they want the story buried. Clara's face went pale. Nathan looked toward Cottonwood Ridge. Now they knew enough to be dangerous, not enough to be safe. A horse nickered near the barn. Nathan drew before the sound finished. A man stepped out from behind the shed with both hands raised. Easy, Mr. Rowe. I would rather not die proving I am friendly. He was broad, gray-bearded, and hatless, with one sleeve torn at the elbow. Clara recognized him and lowered her rifle. Aurelio? Aurelio Sand had worked for Elias Whitcomb for 7 years and trusted almost nobody in Los Huesos. He looked at the wrecked house, then the open tin, and crossed himself. Don Elias told me if he died wrong, I should find Clara and the man with the gray jaw. Nathan did not look pleased to be remembered so exactly. Aurelio nodded toward the ridge. Voss is moving men tonight. I counted 6 riders at the old lime road, maybe more. Why tonight? Clara asked. Because tomorrow at noon, Judge Tabor opens the water claim hearing. If you are absent, Voss gets temporary control. The word temporary almost made Nathan laugh. Men stole forever with temporary papers all the time. The deed inside Clara's boot lining and wrapped the ledger beneath Nathan's saddle blanket. Before dawn, they meant to ride for town and force Judge Tabor to open the hearing in public. But men who own deputies usually own clocks, too. Near midnight, fire bloomed behind the barn. Not a lantern, not lightning. A thrown bottle of coal oil breaking against dry wood. The barn caught fast. Voss's riders came in from 3 sides, shooting above the windows to drive them out. Clara dragged 2 terrified horses loose, while Aurelio fired from behind the corral gate. Nathan moved through smoke and moonlight, dropping one rider from the saddle and scaring another horse into the wash. Then Crane's voice carried from the dark. "Hand over the tin, Rowe, and the girl rides out breathing." Clara looked to Nathan. He shook his head. Men who offer breath are usually measuring graves. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes. It felt longer because fire makes every second bright. Aurelio took a bullet high in the side while pushing Clara behind the stone water box. He did not fall at first. He sat down slowly, angry at his own body for interrupting him. Nathan and Clara pulled him into the house as the riders withdrew toward the ridge. They had not come to kill everyone. They had come to prove no place was safe. The barn collapsed just before sunrise. Clara stood in the yard and watched the last good hay burn. Her father's ranch had been searched, marked, fired, and surrounded. The law was bought. The judge was bought. The paper trail pointed at murder, but the men who needed to hear it were the same men who had profited from silence. That was the darkest hour, not because Clara was afraid, because for one awful moment she understood how theft becomes permanent. Not when evil men act. When tired people decide truth is too expensive to carry. Leo survived the bullet, though he could not ride. Before they left, he gripped Clara's wrist and nodded toward the ruined barn. "Your father said water outlasts fire." Clara took the rifle from beside the door. Nathan watched her. "You can still go south, cross into Messia, start over. This is my father's land. Land gets people killed. So does surrender." That answer changed something in him. Maybe because Elias Whitcomb would have said it in nearly the same way. They rode back toward Los Huesos under a hard white morning sky. Halfway there, Nathan finally told her the truth. Years before, he had led a freight party through a dry canyon after trusting a map sold by Cassian Voss. The waterhole marked on the map had been empty. 3 men died before Elias found them. Nathan had blamed himself. Elias had blamed Voss. "Your father spent years looking for proof Voss sold false routes, false debts, false claims. I told him to quit." "Why?" "Because I knew what men like Voss do when proof gets close." Clara stared ahead. "And he did not quit." "No." Nathan's voice became rough. "He came to Los Huesos because I would not." For a while, only the horses spoke. "Then come now." At noon, the Blue Lantern Saloon was crowded again, because Judge Tabor preferred hearings in rooms where Cassian Voss controlled the doors. That was the old trick. Call it law. Hold it among guns. Let fear sign the minutes. Voss stood near the long table with his perfect waistcoat and his false note. Judge Tabor sat beside him, red-faced and sweating. Deputy Crane stood at the wall with a fresh shotgun. When Clara Whitcomb walked in, dust-streaked and smoke-smelling, the room changed. When Nathan Rowe entered behind her, it changed again. Voss looked almost disappointed. I warned you about public mistakes. Clara stepped forward. Judge Tabor struck the table with a little wooden mallet he had brought to make the theft feel official. This hearing concerns debt and temporary stewardship of the Whitcomb claim. No, Clara said. It concerns murder. That word did what gunfire had not. It made men look up. Nathan placed the ledger on the table. Voss did not reach for it, which told everyone he knew what it was. Judge Tabor tried to close the book before opening it. Nathan rested one hand on the table. Read it out loud. This is irregular, Tabor stammered. So is a dead man being moved from Cottonwood Ridge to North Fork Wash. Deputy Crane shifted. Too soon. Too visibly. Nathan pointed without turning. There is alkali on his boots again. Same dust Elias wrote about. Same dust from the ridge Voss needed cleared before the railroad survey came through. Voss's face tightened. This is theater. Clara pulled the deed from her boot lining and laid it beside the ledger. Then let the town see the stage. The original water deed passed from hand to hand. Men who had pretended not to see her humiliation the day before now studied the paper as if ink could absolve them. The deed was dated 1867, filed before Voss ever set foot in the territory, witnessed by 2 dead men and 1 living one, Aurelio Sand. Judge Tabor went pale, leaned close to him and whispered something. Nathan heard none of it. He was watching Crane. The deputy's right hand moved toward his coat. Clara saw it too. This time, she moved first. She lifted her father's rifle and fired into the floorboard in front of Crane's boot. The room jumped. Crane froze. Clara worked the lever with both hands steady. My father taught me to miss once. That line broke something loose in the room. Not laughter. Not courage exactly. Recognition. The old rancher by the far wall stood first. His name was Amos Keene, and he had lost 20 acres to Voss, on a debt he never understood. Man took my north pasture with paper just like that, he said. Then the livery owner spoke. Then the widow from the wash road. Then the bartender, quietly, admitted he had seen Crane leave town with Elias the night before Elias was found. 1 voice became 3. 3 became 7. 7 became enough. That was how fear cracked in Los Huesos. Not all at once. By seams. Voss saw it happening and reached for the derringer hidden beneath his coat. Nathan drew. The first shot came from Voss. It burned across Nathan's ribs and smashed a bottle behind him. Nathan's Colt answered once. The derringer flew from Voss's hand and skidded under the table. Crane raised the shotgun. The old rancher Amos hit him from the side with a chair before he could fire. For the first time in years, the town did not watch a wrong thing happen in silence. Voss staggered backward, clutching his ruined hand. His fine waistcoat was streaked with dust now. He looked smaller that way, less like an empire, more like a man who had spent too long being obeyed. Judge Tabor tried to slip out the back, and found the Chinese cook standing there, with a cleaver in one hand, and no expression at all. Nobody had to say much after that. The papers were read, the ledger was copied, and was restored in front of witnesses who could no longer pretend they had seen nothing. Lyle Crane confessed before nightfall, not because his conscience woke up, because cowards often mistake confession for shelter once power changes rooms. He admitted Elias Whitcomb had been killed near Cottonwood Ridge after refusing Voss's offer. He admitted the body had been moved. He admitted Judge Tabor had known enough to keep his mouth shut. Cassian Voss said nothing. Men like him rarely confess to anything except inconvenience. 3 days later, riders carried warrants east. Riders carried warrants east. Aurelio Sand lived long enough to sit on Clara's porch with his bandaged side and complain that the coffee was weak. The burned barn would take months to rebuild. The cattle were still thin. The debt Voss invented had vanished, but real hardship remained. Justice did not turn the desert green. It never does. But the spring beneath Cottonwood Ridge kept running. That mattered. Clara stood by it one morning while Nathan tightened the cinch on his horse. "You are leaving," she said. "Town has enough trouble without adding mine." She looked at the healing wound along his side. "You bled for it. That does not make it home." For a moment he looked toward the ridge, where Elias Whitcomb had died over water, paper, and the right to keep what was his. "Your father saved my life once," Nathan said. "I was late paying the debt." Clara shook her head. "No, you paid it when you walked through that door." Nathan did not answer. Some debts cannot be settled cleanly. They can only be carried differently. He rode out before noon. Los Huesos did not become good in a day. No town does. Men who had looked away still had to live with the memory of their own silence. Judge Tabor's chair stayed empty for weeks. Saloon reopened with the bullet hole still in the ceiling, and people learned not to stand beneath it. Clara kept the water deed in a tin box under the old mission bell, not because paper had saved her. Paper had almost destroyed her. She kept it there because truth needs a place to live after fear is done with it. Years afterward, when strangers passed through Los Huesos and asked why men in that town looked each other straight in the eye, someone would point toward Cottonwood Ridge and tell them about the day a tired gunman walked into a saloon, saw a woman being forced to sign away her dead father's land, and said the one word the whole town had forgotten how to say. Stop. That was how Los Huesos changed, not because fear disappeared, because shame finally found its way back into the room.